These are the four most important lessons that Africa must learn from the situation in the Middle East. I'm talking about the war in Iran, or the aggression in Iran by the United States of America and Israel. We have four fundamental and important lessons that we have to learn as African people for our own future, for our own struggle, and most importantly, for our own survival. Lesson number one. We saw that the United States, which has all the capabilities in terms of military strength and budget to take on Iran on itself, linking with Israel, which also has the well-equipped army, military budgets capable of taking on Iran by itself, but they had to unite in order to attack Iran. This tells us that if strong people, if strong nations are able to unite in order to act together, to act on matters of common interest, how much more us as weak nations, poor people, are supposed or must unite in order to consolidate their power and act and change their conditions. So I think this has been so far the language that strong people understood. It's only weak people, poor nations, who don't understand the language of unity. And in fact, in their eyes, unity is kind of a weakness. But in reality, unity is not weakness. Unity is power. So there's nowhere that some little countries such as Gabon, Benin, even Burkina Faso on its own will be able to take on France, which is 150 times bigger than Burkina Faso in terms of GDP, growth, military budget, so forth and so on. It cannot be able to tackle France by itself and overcome France in order to liberate completely itself. This is what we have to understand as African people. So this brings me to the fundamentals of Pan-Africanism, which is about the unity of African people and unity of our institutions in order to create a power base that will liberate the continent. So that is to say that the idea of Pan-Africanism remains the valid solution or formula for the liberation of the continent. For Africa to rise, for Africa to liberate, for Africa to emancipate, Africa must unite. Our institutions must be united. Our people must be united. It's not a cry for weakness. It's the need and the necessity for strength and for the liberation of Africa. Because, as I said, no single and individual country in Africa, regardless of our aspirations, will be able to overcome the forces of imperialism that are keeping us from using our resources for our own benefits. It's only unity that will allow us to unite our strength, to build a strong army, to protect the whole continent, to build the strong economy, to cater for the whole continent. The lesson number two is that Iran is not governed by charisma, even though there are prominent figures in Iran, such as the supreme leader and the president, but these people are not at the center of Iran, of Iranian machine or regime. Iran is governed by ideology. So, one of the stupidities that the Westerners did was to think that by taking out the supreme leader, Ayatollah, the whole system will collapse like in many countries, what can happen? You take out the leader, the whole system collapsed. In Venezuela, they took out Maduro and the regime changed. The remaining leadership actually capitulated and collaborated with the United States. Recently, the president that is there was thanking President Trump. I don't know if it's because President Trump brought them liberation or because he arrested Maduro. I don't know. But the point is, in many countries where the regime is based or is built, the system or the state is built on the charisma of the leader. When you take out the leader, the whole system collapses like the house of cards. And this is what has been happening in the past. When you look at what happened to Kwame Nkrumah, what happened to Patrice Lumumba, what happened to Thomas Sankara, these were charismatic leaders. Once taken off, the whole system collapsed. But when you look in Iran, the leadership in Iran has been kind of decapitated since last year. during what is known as the 12-year war, where you talk about the scientific leaders, political leaders, military leaders. They've been taken out one by one. They've been removed, most of them that we know in the past. But the machine continues to function. The regime is still alive. All those new leaders who come to replace those that have been taken out, they still following, the ideology of Iran. They're still fighting the same fight. This demonstrates the power of the Iranian regime and the weakness of Western ideas, which always targets charismatic leaders in order to destroy the ideals on which they are basing their movement. This is the second lesson that we need to understand, which is for Africa, we don't have to build the struggle of African liberation around charisma. And I'm saying that because we have over-worshipped leaders such as Ibrahim Traore, General Chani Assimi Goïta, which are good leaders. We need them and more of them on the continent, but we don't have to over-worship them or to kind of to personalize the struggle around these people, because once they are taken out, then what else do we have? That's the problem. So we need to build the leadership in Africa around ideology, not around charisma, not around charismatic leaders. So in one words, in the ACAP, we call this, let the vision lead. All of us must be led by the vision or the ideology, not by individuals, so that when one is taken out, other one comes and replaces and plays the same functions. In other words, leaders are only people who play certain functions such as communication, strategic leadership, so forth and so on. Once one is taken out, one can replace and play the same function. But the most important thing is the system, the organization. The struggle must continue, because the struggle is not built on charismatic leaders. It's built on the ideology that we are pursuing, which is the liberation of Africa. So that is to say, Africans, please let us then put a break, a little bit of break on worshipping leaders, but let's look into what is the ideology that we're fighting for. Who is the true enemy? What is the ideals that we want? And what are the institutions that we are building? How can we keep them alive, whether the leaders are there or not? That's an important lesson that we have to learn. The lesson number three is that Iran is doing something that Africa has not yet even begun to think about, which is to protect the resources of the continent, except countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, where the leaders there have reclaimed the resources of the country to use them for the benefits of their people. And this is what Iran has been doing. So if you want to understand the reason why Iran is being bombarded and attacked, is simply because the regime that came after the Shah, after the revolution in 1969, somewhere around there, 78, if I'm not mistaken, that regime, which is the Islamic regime, was aiming to protect the resources of Iran for the Iranian people, because before them, the Shah regime that was there, installed by the United States and the UK, was there to facilitate the exploitation of the resources of Iran towards the West, or towards the Western corporations. That's what Shah was doing. He stole the money, the oil of Iran, in order to send them to the West. So there was a revolution. Then what they have done was to keep the resources of Iran for the Iranians, and that is a mistake for capitalists, because the capitalist countries want to exploit even what they don't have. So Africans, we haven't even thought about it, because as we're speaking right now, we don't even think about the ownership of our resources. That is not even on the table of discussion. We're still thinking about how can we be allies with this and that, so that they can come and take our resources and give us paper money, can come and build the roads. We don't even think as yet about how to protect, to serve God, to defend our resources for this present generation and the future generation. So I'm trying to say that when we begin to embark in that kind of discussion, automatically we'll be attracting the enemies. Exactly what is happening to Iran will be happening to Africa. So can you imagine what will be done to individual countries if you attempt to protect your resources. It's only when we do this as a collective, as a continent, then we'll be able to protect and to defend our ideas. That's very important. So what I'm trying to say is that Iran is doing something that we haven't even started to think about, and it is time for us to begin thinking about it in order to take charge and ownership of our resources, use them for our present generation and the future generation. So, in other words, at this point, I'm trying to say that the defeat of Iran is going to be a very big moral and ideological setback for Africa, as well as for all the struggling people in the world. On the other side, the victory of Iran against the US and Israel is going to be a very moral victory. It's going to be a moral victory for Africa and all the struggling people because it's going to be what is called a good example for us, because it's going to give us the courage to also stand up and take charge of our resources, take ownership of our land, and eventually use them for the benefits of our people. The lesson number 4 and the last one is the way that Iran is fighting this war. There are words, there's a word that is, I've overheard it on the internet. They call it asymmetrical war. It means you don't correspond your strength with the strength of your enemy. You're trying to locate the weakest point of the enemy and to hit there while the enemy is punching you on the first, but you are not able to punch him back on the first. You then punch the chair on which he's standing so that he can collapse. So that's what Iran is doing. So, for example, Iran is using about like a 50,000 drone or 30,000 US dollars drone, relatively very cheaper to manufacture and very quick to manufacture. And then he's sending these drones in Israel on American base. And then American is using missiles that cost million US dollars, right, to manufacture in order to defend itself against drones that cost 50,000 US dollars to build. This is very important. So the aim is to collapse the enemy, economically speaking, to make this war very costly, very expensive for the enemy, so that the enemy can stop aggressing you. The other strategy is to paint a fighter jet on the ground on concrete, and then when the enemy comes in the sky and he sees the image, he thinks that's actually a fighter jet without understanding it's just the image, and then he send expensive missiles there to bombard something that is not existing. All these are strategies being used to collapse the enemy morally, economically, financially. So I'm trying to say this I'm trying to make this point by saying this, is that Africans, mostly we have ambitions to imitate the United States, to have weapons that the United States have, the France have, UK have, so forth and so on. And that even collapse the little resources, the little economy that we have, that we can use to take care of our people. We dissipate this by trying to imitate the enemy and is savagery. But Iran is taught us that we can use different methods to still make our point understood, to fight and win the same battle. That's what I understand by the strategies used by Iran. We don't necessarily need to have ballistic missiles, have intercontinental missiles, but what we have are ways of life, our culture, our traditions. How can we use this as a tools of protection, defense, and security for Africa? These are the questions that we don't even ask. All that we want is to do what the US has been doing, to buy the weapons from the US, to buy the weapons from UK. We are like in the competition on the continent to buy these weapons that we don't even use against each other on the continent. And we think that we can use them to defend ourselves against the very same people who sold us those weapons. So I think we are still at the crash in terms of maturity, national maturity, and having a certain vision that projects power, that projects strength and the desire to rise in power and in dominance in the world, even though we have all the things, all the tools, all the necessity to dream about power and to rise to power. So I think with this, I conclude these 4 lessons can be very useful for Africa, because we still have to go where Iran is. It means we still have to rise, to manifest our will to power, and most importantly, to protect and defend and utilize our resources for ourselves and for our people of this generation on and of the generations to come. Peace and love, freedom and decolonization to all African people, those at home, those abroad. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is not on streets, is in the mind. My name is King Kabbalah from the African Continental Unity Party. I send you revolutionary greetings. Thank you so much and see you next time. Bye-bye.